person in the room, and I believe we have one member online using the Zoom application. Again, just like to remind members as well as our witnesses, just about the audio system when you're not using your headset. If you could just place it down on the marker on your desk, keeping it away from the microphone at all times. Please do not touch the microphone. If you need to adjust it, best to turn off the microphone like that. Already breaking the rules to avoid audio feedbacks. Conformément à l'article 108.3G.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee is undertaking its consideration of Report 3, the current and future use of federal office space, Reports 1 to 4 of the Auditor General of Canada, referred to committee Tuesday, June 10th, 2025.
I'd like to introduce our witnesses, some of whom have opening statement. From the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Colleen Volk, President and Chief Executive Officer. Nice to see you today. From the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, Paul Halucha, the Deputy Minister. Nice to see you. Janet Golding, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Housing and Homelessness Branch. Nice to have you in as well. And of course, from the Office of the Auditor General, we have Karen Hogan, the Auditor General of Canada. Nice to see you again. Nicolas Boulet. Bonjour, as a Director. And Marguerite Armoltula. I believe I got that right. Yes, Armoltula. Pardon me, I like to check in with people beforehand. Principal, nice to see you as well. We'll now turn the opening statements. Auditor, you have 5 minutes to kick us off, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report on the current and future use of federal office space, which was tabled in the House of Commons on June 10th. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Our audit looked at federal government's efforts to right-size its office space, to minimize costs, and free up underused properties for potential conversion into affordable housing. In 2017, Public Services and Procurement Canada, or PSPC, estimated that half of the government's office space was underused. And in 2019-2020, the department started planning for a 50% reduction by 2034. However, at the time of our audit, PSPC projected it would only be able to reduce the government's office space by 33% in that time frame. The department estimated that reducing the federal office portfolio would generate savings of about $3.9 billion over the next 10 years. We found, however, that PSPC had made little progress in reducing office space. Efforts to right-size the portfolio achieved less than a 2% reduction from 2019 to 2024, mainly because of a lack of funding and the reluctance of some departments to reduce their footprint. We also found that PSPC lacked up-to-date, standardized, and reliable information from federal tenants on the daily use of office space. Using information from all of its tenants would better enable the department to adjust its plans and maximize opportunities for future reductions. Nous avons constaté que la capacité du secrétaire.
We found that the Treasury Board Secretariat's ability to offer direction and support to departments and organizations regarding management of real property has reduced considerably since the dissolution of the Centre for Expertise on Real Property in 2024. The centre had been set up in 2021 to support the government in the management of its real property portfolio. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, supported by Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, is mandated to transform surplus federal office properties into affordable housing through the Federal Lands Initiative. The audit found that while the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation was on track to meet the initiative's 2027-28 target to secure commitments to build 4,000 new housing units, the target was based only on commitments, and that only about 40% of units would be ready for occupancy by 2027-2028. Furthermore, we found that the criterion for affordability used by the CMHC for the Federal Lands Initiative was not based on household income. This meant that renters in the lowest income ranges, whose affordable housing needs were the greatest, did not fully benefit from this initiative. Public Services and Procurement Canada and federal tenants need to accelerate their efforts to contribute to increasing stock for housing that is sustainable, accessible, and affordable. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you. Thank you. Next.
5 minutes if you'd like it.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to discuss the Auditor General's report on the use of federal office space, particularly in relation to the Federal Lands Initiative. It's an honor to be here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Comme vous le savez peut-être, en 2000...
As you may know, in 2023, the responsibility for housing policy moved from the CMHC to the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, also known as HICC. As a result of this, policy development for the Federal Lands Initiative resides with the HICC. The initiative continues to be administered by the CMHC. So I'll start by saying that CMHC and Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada appreciate the Office of the Auditor General's attention and recommendations. With the Auditor General's input in mind, CMHC and HICC are working together to improve the initiative, to maximize its benefits for Canadians with the greatest housing need.
Initiative, or FLI, is a $317 million fund that supports the transfer or leasing of federal lands and buildings to eligible proponents to be used for affordable housing. So far, it has supported the development of approximately 5,100 homes. That means, as mentioned in the Auditor General's report, the program is on track to meet its unit targets. I could point to multiple examples of homes that have been built through this program. There's one right up the road from here, the Mikinak community, built on the former CFB Rockcliffe site. It was completed last year and offers 271 homes at different affordability levels. Mikinak was built through the Federal Lands Initiative and another National Housing Strategy program, the Affordable Housing Fund, in partnership with the province and the City of Ottawa. We continue to work with HICC to report FLI's results in the National Housing Strategy's quarterly public progress report. Following the Auditor General's recommendation, we will provide more clarity in the FLI results when reporting units committed, under development, built, and repaired. And we will collaborate to explore measures that ensure projects support affordable housing in communities that need it. We're not the only partners involved in the FLI program, and so we will continue working closely with others, federal, provincial, territorial, Indigenous, and other partners, to attract proponents who will provide housing that serves the needs of all Canadians. The Federal Lands Initiative program is just one tool in the toolbox, one part of the Government of Canada's effort to increase the supply of homes and restore housing affordability. As you know, the Government of Canada is launching a new entity, Build Canada Homes, to increase the supply of affordable housing. Meanwhile, CMHC will continue to deliver on its mandate to contribute to the well-being of the housing system. We will continue providing mortgage loan insurance, securitization, market-oriented supply programs such as the Apartment Construction Loan Program, and industry-leading research. We will complement the work of Build Canada Homes and the other federal agencies involved in housing. And together, we will work with partners in other governments and other sectors to make a better, stronger, more affordable housing system. We consider the Office of the Auditor General to be one of those partners. And so again, I thank you for the invitation today to talk about this report and the Federal Lands Initiative program. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We begin with our first round of questions. It consists of 3 members with 6 minutes each. Monsieur Deltel, c'est vous qui va commencer ce matin.
If you'd like to begin this morning, you have 6 minutes, Mr. Deltel. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your House of Commons and your Canadian Parliament. My questions will focus on Madame Volk. Ms. Volk, your corporation is responsible for ensuring as much housing as possible for as many Canadians as possible and to govern responsibly. Can you tell me whether you paid bonuses to your employees and your officers this year? Thank you for the question. I'll answer in English, and I hope that that's fine with you.
We have a system of pay that is, you asked the question around bonuses. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. We have a system of pay that is known as pay at risk. So we establish a compensation level for our employees, and we don't give it to them all at once. We give them a base salary, and we reserve part of it, which they get only upon completion of their objectives. So while the media likes to call that a bonus, to us it's actually part of our compensation philosophy. It's pay at risk.
Est-ce qu'il est vrai que 99% des dirigeants...
It is true that 99% of CMHC employees received bonuses last year. Perhaps I don't have the figures, but 99%, that's not exactly a minority. That's almost everybody who received a bonus. But a bonus is not salary. A bonus is when you achieve goals which were really difficult to achieve. But if 99% of officers have achieved these goals, perhaps the objectives were not properly set. How is it possible that 99% of your officers were able to receive a bonus?
It is not a bonus. It is part of their compensation that is put at risk at the beginning of the year. And if they don't achieve their specific objectives, they're not entitled to the full payment of that amount. I think the fact that most of our employees do attain their objectives is something that I would be proud of.
Pouvez-vous nous donner un exemple précis d'un de vos...
Could you give me a specific example of one of your officers who really met the objectives that Canadian citizens wish for? In other words, that their officers accomplish things. Access to property. That's your objective, is it not? Can you give me a specific example of one of your officers, because 99% of them received a bonus? So what was their objective achieved so that Canadians' access to housing is fantastic, whereas the situation is in fact the opposite?
Risk is relative, their objectives are established on the basis of what they can individually contribute to the corporation. So every individual will have a different set of objectives, and it will relate to their role in the organization and how they can help the organization achieve its success.
$30.6 million.
$30.6 million in bonuses have been paid to your officers and employees. Do you find that's to be expected to have so much bonuses when we have the worst situation in housing since the World War II?
Side as pay at risk to pay only if they achieve their objectives.
La Banque Royale du Canada a dit que c'est...
The Royal Bank of Canada said that we are currently experiencing the most difficult times in accessing property. Your objective as an organization is to ensure that Canadians can access ownership of property. Banks have confirmed that this is the worst situation since World War II. How can you provide bonuses to your people when we're going through the worst crisis now and it's not changing despite your actions?
Crisis in Canada, and there are many partners who are required to help resolve that housing crisis. Unfortunately, CMHC does not have the tools to solve that on our own. We have many partners. We have the federal government. We have the provincial governments, the municipalities. Many nonprofits are involved. It is not a situation that CMHC has the resources or the mandate to solve on its own.
Votre mandat n'est-il pas d'avoir...
But isn't your mandate to make everybody able to access home ownership?
Our mandate is much broader than that. Our mandate is to help the system function appropriately and efficiently.
Ben, force est d'admettre que le système ne fonctionne pas, madame, parce qu'on vit.
But very clearly, the system is not working because we're experiencing a terrible crisis, the worst since the Second World War. 70% of people who do not have access to homeownership have given up their dream of owning a home. That's your responsibility to help them. How can you pay bonuses to 99% of your officers when 70% of people who don't have access to housing ownership have decided to give up on that dream? What are we supposed to tell those people who've given up on their dream when you're paying 99% of your employees a bonus for $30 million?
I agree with you completely that there is a housing crisis and that it's very sad what is happening in the country and that people can't afford the homes that they need. I don't agree that it is CMHC's responsibility to solve that on our own because we don't have the resources or the mandate to solve that on our own. We have a mandate to deliver programs on behalf of the government, which we do, and we meet our service standards, and we fulfill our objectives and our mandate as defined by the Government of Canada.
Les gens qui nous écoutent, quand ils paient des taxes et impôts, ça.
Our listeners who are paying taxes expect Crown corporations to serve them. In this case, we are seeing that the people who are being served by the taxes are the senior officials.
Et voilà.
Thank you. Next.
For 6 minutes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. It's good to see everybody back for the fall session and to look at a new report. So my first question is to Ms. Hogan. In your report, it's mentioned that the Treasury Board made good progress in implementing improvements in how real property is managed within the government. Could you expand on that?
Mm-hmm. So Treasury Board has sort of a dual role in this aspect. They set the return to office policies for the federal public service, so they have an ability to influence where how many public servants are in federal office buildings. When it comes to housing and how they can afford, they're the ones who free up, and with PSPC, the buildings that can then move to the Canada Lands Initiative. So back in 2000, I think it was 19, they did a comprehensive.
Et ensuite, ils ont fait une évaluation globale des actifs pour identifier quels actifs pourraient être réutilisés d'une différente façon. Et donc, ceci s'est soldé par 119 recommandations qui visaient à améliorer l'utilisation de ces actifs dans le service. Le centre d'expertise a été dissolu à la suite de cette initiative, malgré qu'ils aient créé plusieurs bonnes initiatives. C'est maintenant le rôle des ministères et agences de mettre en œuvre ces initiatives. Maintenant, M. Aloucha.
Okay. Mr. Halucha, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Close? Okay, apologies then. So how will you take some of the progress that was made by the Treasury Board in managing the real properties as you developed Build Canada Homes?
Thank you very much for the question. So Build Canada Homes, which is the new agency that was recently announced by the Prime Minister and Minister Robertson, will have as a key function, different than Mrs. Vogt just outlined. One of the key functions it will have will be building on federal lands, and so there were a number of properties that were identified or announced at the time of the announcement. What will be so that's obviously a very key difference between the two organizations. There's a lot we can do to improve the speed at which surplus lands are made available for public policy purposes, including housing. And I think some of the innovations that the Auditor General pointed out that the Treasury Board has made will help to assist, but there's still a lot to do to improve how quickly lands are made available. And in particular, I think some of the targeted lands. I think another point that was made by the Auditor General in a report was the selection of properties. And in fact, right now, what occurs is the surplus lands is what's made available. So lands are surplus. They're determined by departments, custodians, that they're not needed anymore, and those are the lands that become available. We need to move more to a system where properties are identified and utilized based on their value that they can bring to solve public policy issues like housing.
Are we on track?
On track in terms of making improvements?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of progress made in the last 2 years. I would note the federal land bank that was completed at the end of last summer. That was a very important step forward to actually assess, all of the surplus properties, identify what their potential was from a housing perspective, put them out to the market for assessment. One of the challenges is that the value of property is not the same in every market, and so having surplus property being brought into a transaction can sometimes make a large difference, sometimes less of a difference, and so it's not always the case that it alone unlocks housing, and that's certainly been our experience over the last couple of years, and so. What CMHC does through the FLI program is actually bring that subsidy that is still necessary in order, especially to get to affordable and deeply affordable housing. So I think that's a key component going forward.
Thank you. My next question is to Ms. Volk. The audit found that while CMHC was on track to meet the initiative's 2027 to 2028 target to secure commitments to build 4,000 new housing units, the target was only based on commitments. Only about 49% of the units would be ready for occupancy by 2027-28. Could you explain why?
Certainly. This is a construction program, so construction takes a long time. I think that's the short answer to your question. But essentially what the program does is it brings properties to market, and we negotiate with the proponents for them to acquire the property. Then they need to repair, rebuild, construct, and that is a process. So at the time that they've won the parcel, when they won the property, so there's a tender for the process and they're the successful proponent, they probably haven't already done all of their planning, their design work, their work with the city on zoning and everything. So they have still a full construction cycle to come. So it does take a while between the winning of a tender through the FLI system and the actual construction or development of the units.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup. Suivant.
Thank you very much. Following for 6 minutes.
Just avant ça, Justine. Deputy Minister, would you... Your last name, I... Haluka.
Sorry.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to be here not for a terribly long time, but I don't like when people get my name wrong. So, Haluka, thank you. Monsieur Lemire, vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. My first question will be for Ms. Hogue. What do you think of the Auditor General's analysis that the affordability criteria are not designed to optimize access to housing and affordability? I would add to this, do we have a clear definition of what an affordable housing unit is? Thank you. I'll just check that I understood your question, because the interpretation is not working for me.
The affordability and whether that we have the right definition of affordability to ensure that we're getting the right objectives in affordability. C'est ça?
Oui, mais quelle est votre réaction?
Yes, but how do you react to the Auditor General's criticism about what this affordability is?
So, I'll say the program was designed in a way that the way the properties are selected is the custodians offer their properties. So the program doesn't seek out properties in specific areas. It accepts the properties that custodians have identified. Those properties may be in the areas that are in the highest core housing need, or they may not be. They're certainly in communities with housing need because every community has some amount of core housing need. But are they in the communities with the highest core housing need? Not necessarily, because they're supplied by the custodian. So that is a fact of the way the program was designed. Is there the definition of affordability that's used is there are different definitions of affordability used in different government programs. I agree that it is ideal if there's one common definition of affordability, but you have to think about it in the context of what the program is trying to accomplish in terms of affordability and whether it's trying to get at the deepest affordability or something that's more affordable. And so depending on the program objectives, you may find that there is a different definition.
Un des premiers éléments qui touche
One of the first aspects of affordability is how you establish this in the various regions. So what I'm seeing at the CMHC is that the criteria don't apply to remote regions. And that's another element that should be defined, because a so-called rural region, let's say Gatineau, which is a bedroom community of Ottawa with 1.6 million inhabitants, is considered rural in Canada. That's a huge problem. So that the CMHC funds should really go to real remote areas, such as mine in the Abitibi-Temiskaming region. So this is something I would like us to look into, please. Better definition. Another problem. There are very few federal buildings available to be transferred into the regions. So this whole program is again focusing on major urban centers. But we have, in Abitibi, we've had more than 20 years of housing problems. And as the last round of housing was built more than 20 years ago, the average construction cost is based on old rates. And no consideration is given to the fact that right now, trees that come from the Abitibi are sent elsewhere, and then they have to come back, and we're going to be charged transportation for the 2x4s. So it costs 30 to 40% more to build a housing unit in Abitibi-Temiskaming. And so none of this is adapted at the CMHC program, and this is major. So it's fine to say we're going to lease apartments and make them affordable. Construction costs have exploded. So this is a problem. How is the CMHC going to be able to adapt its programs on adaptability to the reality of the resource regions? And how can we actually meet all the needs of all of the populations of Canada? The situation and your issues, I understand.
It is true that some of our programs are more difficult. As you say, in the Federal Lands program, we don't have very many Canadian office buildings in rural parts of Canada, and so the Federal Lands Initiative is not one that's likely to have great, proportionally anyway, great benefits in the rural areas of Canada. And there are issues in other programs as well. At CMHC, we are administering programs as designed by the government, and so we follow the rules of the programs that we're designing. I think if your question is about how can we adapt our programs in the future so that they are more appropriate, the policy lead on that has been transferred to Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, and so they may have some thoughts about how they would want to address that going forward. But I can assure you that I'm aware of the issues that you raise, and we are administering the programs that we have to the fullest extent that we can, but I acknowledge that they don't all work.
Je veux nommer certains éléments avec le temps qui me reste.
I'd like to use my remaining time to name a few things. An apartment, according to the policy in Rouyn-Noranda, should be for $660. The construction costs have exploded, so the average cost, the median cost, is $850. Try to find an apartment at that price. It's impossible. We're talking about an average of $1,250 and up. The mines bought them, workers bought them. It's not the same thing. And my last question. Build Canada Homes, what does this mean to housing construction? Do you think that a change in structure can truly change the housing offering in a region such as Abitibi-Temiskaming? I can't speak on behalf of Build Canada Homes.
that, but in terms of CMHC and our programs, we're, as I say, aware of the concerns that you raise, and we'll be working with HICC as future programs are designed by HICC that we can deliver.
Tout petit commentaire.
Very brief comment. I'm glad that you're aware of this. And of course, this is something that I'm going to be coming back to regularly because it's a recurring problem where I'm from. And I think it's one of the problems, this lack of adaptability of the programs. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our next round, which will consist of 5 members, various times. Leading us off is Mr. Kirk. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I will be asking my questions to Ms. Volk. StatsCan and the National Housing Strategy definition of affordability is 30% of a family's income. So in Ontario, if we can use Ontario as an example, that's about $750, give or take a few dollars. However, CMHC has it as 80% of the median market rate, which is $1,200. Now, that's a massive disparity. This means that your so-called affordable housing actually has become unaffordable for a lot of Canadians. Would you be committed to changing your metric to the StatsCan and the National Housing Strategies?
It's a great question. CMHC isn't in charge of that in the programs that we deliver on behalf of government. The government establishes the criteria that we use, and then we administer the programs accordingly. It may be a more appropriate question for Paul in terms of going forward. But what I will say is absolutely, if you use the 30% of income definition, you get a lower number in most cases than you would if you used our 80% of median market rate, of median market rent. It does drive a different result, and it doesn't drive to the same level of affordability, but it does drive affordability if you use a more if this is the market rates, it drives it down a little bit, not as much as you're saying as if we used a different number. We are still getting a benefit. In some programs, that may be the benefit that you're looking for. You may not need to go all the way. It depends.
Fair enough.
And it costs more if you drive it down further.
Fair enough. But in a housing crisis that we're in, I would hope that your organization, we've kind of seen today, is at the top of all the other organizations. I would hope with your influence that we could actually meet that lower rate in the current state that Canada's in. That would be a pretty good goal. I think everyone would agree on that. Would you?
There are certain programs that are definitely geared towards more affordability. I would say I don't want to be that categorical about it, though, because there is a trade-off between the number of units you can support with a given set of money and the affordability targets. So if we make them more affordable, we can, for the same amount of money, we can do less.
Okay.
So
I mean, that would be...
in a supply crisis, the number of units supported is actually an important factor, too.
Thank you. My recommendation would be that we use the StatsCan. That would be my recommendation moving forward. Now I'd like to go back on my colleague here touched upon these bonuses, and we're in this committee we're here to represent the taxpayer. That's what we're here to do. So I want to touch on this. You had mentioned that it's about $30 million in bonuses, but you had said that it's not necessarily a bonus, but can you elaborate on that? Because what I'm seeing here in my notes is there's no real guidelines, or the workers are working at their own pace. Can you give me clarity on that?
Thanks for the question. Every individual has their own performance management agreement in which they, with their supervisor, establish their objectives for the year. Some of those objectives would be fairly common things, good fiscal administration, good, those kinds of things. But then they have very specific targets based on what they are bringing to the organization. So it's different for someone in an IT function versus someone in an HR function versus someone on the front lines versus someone in our insurance function. Everybody has their own. So they with their supervisor are establishing their own objectives. If they don't meet their objectives, they are not entitled to that pay at risk. As I say, we don't call it, it's pay at risk.
So we know that 99% of your organization met their standard. I still don't see clarity on that. I can appreciate that everybody has their own goals set out I guess, at the time of signing the contract. I don't think that's in my opinion, a good explanation to the taxpayer. I think that has to be a little bit more clear cut, because even if you work at a car lot, you understand where you're going to get above your base pay. You're clearly not a car lot. You're a massive organization. There's no real clarity. So out of all the employees you have, each individual has their own incentive. I just don't think that explanation is a good explanation for the taxpayer, in my opinion. It's not very clear. My recommendation would be to have a lot of clarity in there, because as it reads, it's $30 million in bonuses to 99% of your workers. And at a time of a housing crisis, we have to justify that to the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Keurig. I'll allow a response, please.
Thank you. I agree that it could be interpreted that way, but it's not the reality to me. I would say we don't, first of all, as I mentioned, CMHC isn't responsible, in and of itself is not capable of solving the housing crisis, so that can't be the overall measure. But also, very importantly, every person in CMHC has a different way of contributing. I use the example of someone in IT. They're going to do an excellent job of their IT systems. Whether or not people are, whatever the situation is on the ground in a housing context. So everyone brings their own individual piece to the organization, and that is what is recognized through the performance pay.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tesser-Dirksen, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks, everyone, for being here. I think you can tell how passionate we all are about this issue. I have a background as a municipal councillor, and we really were boots on the ground talking to people about housing, dealing with regional governments and local governments and our federal and provincial partners at the time as well, and lots of nonprofit groups as well to address this issue. It really is a multifaceted solution that we need to meet, and you should know, and I think you do know, how serious we all are about addressing this for Canadians. I have a hodgepodge of questions, but I'm going to start with the Auditor General. Mrs. Hogan, you mentioned in your report, and I know PSPC is not here today, but I will ask about the note in your report about improvement to data collection, particularly with respect to the federal tenants. So what improvements would you say could be made internally to get that data flowing more effectively so we can make more data-based policy?
When we approached looking at a federal office space, there's two basic elements you need to know if you're planning on reducing it. So how much office space do you have and how is it being used? And while how much do you have is known, it's the how is it being used is where the missing element is, right? If you want to be able to consolidate buildings and free up buildings, and as another a witness said earlier, if you want to target buildings, you need to know how they're being used so that you know how many public servants you have to move, and that's what's missing, is sort of the standardized collection of information that would give that piece of information to PSPC. What we looked at was how are federal tenants knowing who's in the building, how often is it being used, and how much space is underutilized or left vacant. And there was so many ways that this was being tracked. Badge swipes, applications, or just physical counting, and that's not giving you a reliable picture, and then it's difficult to consolidate when you're not comparing the same elements. So we felt that basic piece of information was key to help solve how to target going forward.
Next question is for Mrs. Volk. This was already touched on a little bit, but going back again to the Auditor General's report that noted your department's on track to meet those goals of the 4,000 new housing commitments. There is a note in there as well, though, that coordination across government entities and stakeholders can be improved. And I already mentioned the work, that I'm used to doing when I was back in the municipality working with non-for-profits, for example, and other stakeholders. What's your department doing to improve that coordination?
I absolutely agree that coordination could be improved. We have, at CMHC, we make it a priority to deal very effectively with the other provincial governments and the municipalities and our colleagues at HICC and soon with Build Canada Homes. That will be very important that we are doing everything we can to coordinate that. I think there is a role for larger coordination in there. I believe that will be part of the role of Build Canada Homes, that they will be the one-stop shop when it's an affordable housing project. That will be an important role for Build Canada Homes, to be bringing those people together and really acting as a catalyst for some of that. That's my understanding anyway of part of the role of Build Canada Homes. But in terms of what we will be doing at CMHC, is everything we can to make sure that that coordination works smoothly and that every party knows what the other party is responsible for.
Appreciate that. And just leading from your answer, are you putting best practices in place now? Are you discussing this with your team to determine how you're going to, once that does come down from Build Canada Homes, as you're anticipating, how you're going to implement that quickly?
We are having discussions internally, but it'll be, I think, really reinforced when Build Canada Homes is up and running and we have interlocutors at the various levels of the organization. But it's certainly something that I will be speaking with the new CEO of Build Canada Homes right away in terms of how we can work most effectively together.
Thank you. And a question for Mr. Haluka. We noted in the report that there was this cutting of the preferred disposal time in half from the 6 to 8 years to 3 years. Can you talk to me about the rationale for doing that? In hindsight, was it realistic? And were there outside factors that made the proposed reduction sensible then, but perhaps more difficult now?
You're talking about the movement of surplus properties onto the housing land bank.
Right.
Land bank at that point. Yeah, I mean, this was, I think, a really important change. The land bank is a really important innovation in terms of the way that public service is managing public lands. So the average time of moving a surplus property through the surplusing process was 9 years, and it remains still too long at this point. And it's kind of, there's lots of different theories about why that was the case. I think in my previous role, I worked at the Privy Council office and was responsible for public lands. And what really seemed to stick out was there actually wasn't a premium put on getting lands through the system. There wasn't sort of the public policy objective, and therefore things sort of just moved at their own speed. And so now what's happened is it's been infused with urgency. As was mentioned on the table, there's a crisis now, and therefore getting lands out. There's a lot more senior attention being given to what is occurring and how long things are taking. There are some things that simply do take time. There's a process of consultations, including First Nations consultations, that is obviously extremely important. There's environmental assessments that need to occur. In some cases, there's infrastructure. So there are some things that are kind of, I would say, out of control. But those things don't just happen because if attention isn't being paid to it. And I think that's the big difference that is occurring now, and I think will need to continue. And I think the movement so you probably would have noticed that Canada Lands Corporation has moved into the housing portfolio, and that was done.
Thank you, Mr. Luke. I'm going to. You were about to land there, and then you took off again. And we'll come back to that. I know you've got a lot more to say. I will just remind members that. I operate a little differently in this committee, and I'll do so until I'm told to do otherwise by members, is that if members get their question in on time, I allow the witnesses to respond to those questions. You just can't interrupt. If you do, it ends right away. Alors, pour M. Lemire, vous avez 2 minutes 30 secondes. Si vous finissez votre question.
Over to Mr. Lemire, you have 2.5 minutes, and if the time is up, I'll let the witnesses answer.
As well, just so members know, if there are ever any trouble translation, I do pause the clock as well if the witnesses seeks clarification. I don't take that from your time. Again, these are, all this, but I just thought I'd reiterate as we start the autumn session. Monsieur Lemire, vous avez 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and I have noted your fairness with respect to translation. Thank you very much. Mr. Luca, Madam Volk seems to be aware of the adaptation problems with programs in the region, and it seems to be because of government policy. Do you share this analysis? Do you believe that programs are adapted to the reality of regions such as Abitibi-Témiscamingue? Yes, I agree. Very well. Can you send us a written definition of what affordable housing is, first of all? I think it would be good to clarify that. And also what the different levels of affordability are, whether we're talking about social or otherwise. What is a rural region? How are they defined? I'd like this in writing because I'd like to use that as a basis for working, because I don't think that Gatineau and Laval should be rural regions. So what is a truly rural region? I don't like the term remote. I don't like resource region either as a term, but if we want programs to be able to be there and to make an 8 or 12 unit plex, it can be so huge for the capacity of attracting and keeping people in the regions. The challenge, it's a challenge. So when you have this kind of problem in the regions, how is the department helping when your initiative does not focus on those regions? How can we ensure that the money is not just used for the major urban regions of Canada? Thank you for your question.
Position to offer like a definition of rural for you on the spot here, but I think like the way you described it, I wouldn't take issue at all. I mean, we do have very different markets, as you know, across the country, and housing policy has to respect and reflect those different regional realities. And that's one of the things that makes housing policy very exciting, but also extremely complicated. And I'll give you, I'll say a couple things about that. So in the Build Canada Homes, which is, as you know, the new organization that has been established, we have adopted a different, an income-based approach to affordability. So as has been discussed at the committee today, which will enable, I think, a better matching of when projects take place in rural areas. It will be the local market's average income rate that will be the basis upon which things like the affordability levels will be changed. So that will be very positive. The question on do you roll this out across all programs is, I think, is a bit of a more complicated one. So first off, the programs are all in stream at this point. So to kind of, and the affordability definition, market definition is not kind of a second or third level factor. I think, as the Auditor General pointed out, it's kind of a core piece of it, right? So if you change the affordability levels, then you really need to look at what is the fiscal allocation of resources to those programs, because you will get less units, your targets will change. Like it has a significant impact on it. So, and where we have been focused for the last number of months is since the new government was elected, has really been around Build Canada Homes, and the focus there is on having not a programmatic approach to doing housing, but actually an investment-based approach, which will be a lot more flexible to exactly the kind of considerations that you're bringing forward, which I agree with.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Stevenson.
Minutes, please.
Thank you. I had a list of questions coming in, but I'm going to start with questions from what my colleagues have already asked, and just to delve a little deeper. Start with Mr. Luca. In your opening remarks, you said that the departments will determine what is going to be vacant land. Have you set out certain requirements to the departments to say, well, we'll back up with the one as to time length. We're now giving you this time, not just being general, but at specific times for when they have to do it now. And then what if some of the departments determine we don't really have vacant lands? Have you given them a definition of this is what it is, vacant land? If you haven't used it within 24 months, then it's vacant and it must go into the program. And what are their goals? And if they have numbers on that. Specifically, being an accountant, I like to have goals. If you can get something to measure by, if we don't have anything to measure by, how do we go from? So that's the first part.
It's a rich set of questions. So PSPC has actually the responsibility for the surplusing process. So I think some of the questions would be, I know they're coming before the committee, and I think would be appropriately directed to them. But the surplusing process, what I mean is that, for example, all the lands on the public land bank right now are lands that have been identified as surplus by departments, which means that they have, through their departmental processes, come to the conclusion that they don't need them, or that they don't need them, and therefore they can exit their holdings. And that's sort of the kind of criteria that actually moves them right now into consideration. There's another category that is still, I think, under discussion, which is really underutilized. And this is lands where they are using them, but perhaps they're not maximizing them. So, for example, if you think about a lot of buildings, times where civil servants were in the office 5 days a week, they have parking lots that are far outsized given the amount of people that are actually utilizing it now, given some of the hybrid decisions. So there's a lot of underutilized lands, and like this, I think there's kind of two avenues to have those kind of come up. So one is the departments have been written to, they have been asked to bring forward their list of underutilized lands. The second thing, and that gets you has some advantages. The other, I think, kind of preferred rate is actually where you've got market interest in properties. And so that's what we have been trying to encourage, where we know somebody is interested in a development, they're focused on a property. Sometimes they're building something, they're adjacent to a piece of federal lands. There's a possibility of having a bigger development if a federal land was added in. That's the kind of place that we're most interested in. Like, we're not interested just in identifying properties so they can go on a land bank and not get utilized. So it's really, where is there an underutilization federally, and there's a kind of an adjoining market demand for that kind of property. And then maybe, I agree with you in terms of the goals and the numbers. To my knowledge, we have not set targets at this point for departments, but I think it's a bit like the reversing of right. So if there's a market demand, then right now I think the environment is much more conducive that there will be action around those properties right now. And some of the conversations we're having with tenants is where it wasn't on their mind that these were lands that were ones that they were going to offer up.
Okay, well, I guess you answered my question that they don't have a number. They don't have the goals set yet. So I think that's problematic to get going on that part. My next question is in regards to opening remarks that Ms. Volk had said that the program is going to be responsible in HICC, but CMHC is going to be managing. I guess I'm a little confused as to, if, say, we had goals set, later when you go back to look at the goals, who's going to be the one that's going to be responsible for saying you didn't meet this? Because it kind of sounds like you both can pass the buck to each side. So who's going to be responsible for saying we accomplished these things when one is operational and the other one's managing, are responsible? So,
well, I can. Do you want to take a stab? I'll take a stab at that one. I mean, so it's not atypical of portfolio management. So it's very often the case that a federal department has policy responsibility, which means and it's done for coherence, right? So if you think about, as I mentioned, CLC is now in the portfolio. You want to, and the issue around definitions, that gets easier if you have a central policy function that has responsibility to be helping to design the programs across the different administrative organizations. And so in this case, CMHC will continue to be responsible for the administration of FLI, and so, were there to be the government want to make changes, we would be responsible for, obviously they have a huge amount of expertise, so that wouldn't be a completely hands-off approach, but we would be the policy leads in terms of those types of changes.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Mr. Osborne, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Just building on some of the questions that my colleagues had asked previously and to the Auditor General, it's very concerning to me that, there's a resistance, I guess, within the public service to modernize workspace and to identify the usage on space. what role can the Public Accounts Committee play in making sure that we overcome that resistance? And I'll add a second layer in here. The information, we've had only 83% response rate based on the workers going in or utilization of space by workers. 37 of 105 tenants provided monitoring data. Without the data, how can the public service really zone in on the buildings that are surplus, where we can make changes within those that real estate? Build Canada Homes is not able to access these buildings or the lands without the cooperation of departments in providing the information and accurate information. That is very concerning to me.
So I think you've raised a few matters, and how can the Public Accounts Committee help? I mean, obviously, this hearing is the first step in the right direction. I think the one that'll be next week, where you have Public Service and Procurement Canada, will be important. Public Service and Procurement Canada is the ones who are consolidating this information and driving that and trying to negotiate reductions of space. And so, I think they will be able to play a bigger role, and a lot of these questions can be asked of them. The need for data, I couldn't agree with you more, that we need it, which is why I think those two fundamental things are essential. What buildings do you have available, and how are they being used or not used, so that you can decide and reallocate and move. Missing that basic piece of information is key. Leaving it up to every department and agency to track and monitor, I don't think is working right now, and that's why we've issued recommendations to Public Service and Procurement Canada to find a way to standardize this and consolidate it, because you need to make a well-informed decision, and without that data, I don't think the decisions will be well-informed.
Thank you. To follow up on that, the standardization of data collection is another concern. We have different tenants of these buildings responding differently with different measurements of the data, different ways of collecting the data. And I know you've made a recommendation for the people who are tuned in with nothing else to do across Canada but to watch public accounts. If you could expand, but also to educate myself and maybe other members of the Public Accounts Committee on what role we can play as well in ensuring that the information that is collected is standardized across departments and tenants of public buildings, so that we are able to provide better decisions and zone in on what buildings are surplus.
So I see two sort of issues. How can the Public Accounts Committee help? And I'll get to that. But then about collection methods and standardizing, I think it's important that every federal department have a way of tracking this, and I think it's important for all public servants to know why monitoring is happening on who is in the building and when. It is about space optimization, and there are many elements on a day-to-day basis. From a security standpoint, I want to know how many of our employees are in our building should something happen. That's a basic first start, but I also want to be able to contribute to, are we right-sizing our space? So I think there should be two motivations, and that's why having it standardized would be helpful. Right now, many buildings are very different. There's different security mechanisms when you walk in, but there has to be a way that we can do it. And we listed out in Exhibit 2 the different ways that it's being done. Some organizations are using many of them, so I think it's really up for the government to pick one or two and then sort that out. How can the committee help in this? Well, the hearing next week is a great place to start, but then it's about continued follow-up on updates on progress on action plans and commitments made. And when you don't see good progress, another hearing. The committee has the ability to make sure that the public service is being accountable for the commitments that they've made in response to the recommendations from our work.
Thank you. The next question.
Mr. Osborne, just your time has elapsed, but I'm going to let you ask a short question, but if you can just kind of keep it short.
It will be a very short question.
Yes, thank you.
For Ms. Volk, you indicated earlier that you're only responsible for so much. You need your partners involved as well. There's only, in rural areas of the country, especially in the smaller provinces, we don't have the library of public lands or public buildings to allow Build Canada Homes to utilize. So we need a greater role, I guess, from CMHC and your partners. What recommendations would you make to ensure that we are reaching rural Canada as well?
Well, I would say first, the policy lead on that is really with HICC now. They're the primary center for policy advice to the government on housing. But as it speaks to rural, I would say the FLI is not a program that's going to work well in rural because of the absence of a lot of federal buildings in rural Canada. But we do have other programs that will work better in remote and rural areas.
Such as?
I will have to come back to you, Mr. Osborne, which leads me to my next question. I'm getting some kind of correspondence here about extending it just a little bit. Mr. Lemire, as-tu beaucoup de questions?
Mr. Lemire, do you have a lot of questions? You have another slot? If I give you another slot, is that something you're of interest in having? Yes.
In preparation, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to start our third round, which will be a full 5 members of various times. Then I'm going to do 3 more spots, but it will go the official opposition, then you, Vladimir Transagon, and then the government always has the last word. So I'm going to have the clerk just fill this up. So it won't be a full 4th round, but just a partial one. We're now going to begin the third round. It's Mr. McKenzie. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish to add to my thanks to everybody here in attendance. I'm a new MP, so I'm still filled with shock and disbelief at some of the timeframes that I learn about with respect to the operation of our federal government. Ms. Hogan, I have great difficulty understanding an inability to identify space used by the federal government and whether there are people in it or not, how much of it is being used, and so on. I'm wondering if you have the information with respect to how long the effort's been underway to identify space utilization.
Well, the identification by the Federal Public Service that a significant portion of their business or their office buildings were underutilized was pre-pandemic. That would have been in 2017. And in 2019, they designed plans to try and get to the reduction of 50%. There was very little movement between 2019 and 2024, mostly because there was no funding allocated towards this. So in the budget 2024 gave money. So now there's funding, and if you want to do something, I think you need resources and funding in order to make sure that it accomplishes. So now it's the ability to move forward. And here's where you need the cooperation of all the federal tenants. And what we saw is that some of the larger tenants were very hesitant to agree to space reductions, motivated by a few reasons. One is they needed perhaps specialized space to deliver their mandate, so couldn't really reduce their space to a certain square foot per employee. 2, there was concern about whether or not increased presence in the workplace would be a requirement. The increase that happened during the audit period actually removed a lot of the flexibility that was in the existing plan to get to 50%. And then we also highlighted the fact that we think that there isn't an incentive for many departments to free up that space. For most departments, rent is not paid, right? It's sort of a global bucket that rents and or owns the buildings. So individually, it doesn't hit your budget, and so you might not be as incentivized to move forward. So we hope that we've highlighted some of the weaknesses and made some recommendations to see bigger progress going forward. But it's not one thing that's slowing this down. There's a lot of things, and data missing is another critical element.
It seems to me to be the most critical piece. We really can't make intelligent changes if there isn't information available about what's taking place on the ground.
I think my office will always be a huge proponent for making well-informed decisions supported by data. And yes, I think you need data. And here, Public Service and Procurement Canada is relying on all of the tenants to provide that. And they haven't had much success with that. People are slow to provide that information. And then when it is provided, it's like comparing apples and oranges, and it's hard to put together.
So failing to respond to that request for information seems to me to be a performance issue. We had some questions previously about performance pay. And when 99% of employees are receiving their performance pay, but we can't get basic information like that, that seems to me to be quite a gap.
Well, this is an area where I hope that the committee could explore with Public Service and Procurement Canada next week. In my view, they should be enforcing that this is happening and that departments are signing on for space reduction. And I know that throughout this, since we've tabled the report, I always try to encourage my deputy minister colleagues to take a real good look at the space they need. I know that I've put up my hand and I am reducing my space, and I don't have rent. So it's not having an impact on me, but it's impacting the bigger, broader public service, hopefully.
Understood. I would like to ask some questions about the Housing Accelerator Fund. Is there somebody here today who can talk about that, address that? Ms. Volk? As I understand it, there was in November of 2023 a press release announcing the fast tracking of 6,800 housing units over 3 years in my city of Calgary. Would you be able to provide information on the status now? We're almost full 2 years later, and I'd like to know how many housing units are either constructed or under construction.
I don't have the data on hand, but I can answer your question maybe conceptually, at least for a start. The Housing Accelerator Fund has as a goal to increase housing starts, definitely, in those municipalities that have signed agreements. It is, however, those results won't be immediate, because what the Housing Accelerator Fund, the commitments that are made as part of that are to speed up the processes of zoning and approvals and things at the municipal, sort of clearing some red tape at the municipal level. That will accelerate processes, but it doesn't magically accelerate construction. Construction is still something that's going to take a while to get shovels in the ground and to build. So the results aren't instant. So we are seeing some starts, but the expectation was that increase in starts would come a little bit later. What we would be seeing in terms of results first are the changes that the municipalities are making, and then the new starts would follow.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is your time.
Thank you, sir.
It flies by. Up next, we have Mr. Housefather joining us online. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Ms. Volk. Ms. Volk, I'll go back to Mr. Deltel's questions originally, where he kept calling the pay that members of your department were receiving at CMHC as bonuses. I understand that bonuses are exceptional payments where work exceeds expectations, and you were trying to explain, I believe, that this was at-risk pay, which is a regular component of pay, not an exceptional component of pay, and that it is given not when work exceeds expectations, but when work meets expectations. Can you sort of explain that so that people don't believe that 99% of your department received bonuses for exceptional performance?
Thank you for the question. Yes. So the way this works, when we engage an employee, there is a job to be done. That job is classified. We determine the salary that is appropriate, the level of compensation that's appropriate for that position. We give a percentage of that salary as base pay. So they get to collect that every 2 weeks as part of their base pay. But we reserve part of it. We hold back part of it. And that is the component that at the end of the year we assess, did that individual meet the commitments that they made that year? So did their performance meet the expectations that we had of them? And if it did, they earn back the rest of the pay that was put at risk at the beginning of the year.
So just so that I can put this into number terms so that people at home can understand this, in many companies, for example, if you earn $80,000, you'll have an eligibility for a bonus. So you're still going to be paid your $80,000, but let's say you're eligible for 10% bonuses based on your personal objectives and departmental objectives. At the end of the year, people will assess if you met, the department met the objectives, you met your objectives, and you may potentially get another $8,000. So you would be paid $88,000 instead of $80,000. You got $80,000 for sure and $8,000 because of exceptional performance. What you're saying is you're paying somebody, your base pay is $80,000, but you're withholding $8,000 of it, for example. So you're withholding 10% and they're only paid $72,000 instead of their normal $80,000 base pay. And if they meet the objectives, not exceed objectives, but meet the objectives, then they'll get the additional $8,000 to bring their base salary to the total 100% of $80,000. Would that be a fair way to explain it?
That's a fair characterization of pay at risk. It is not that at the end of the year we determine that the company has had a tremendous year and we're going to throw a little bit extra to everyone. It's that we have determined how much we feel your job is worth. We've paid you part of it up front, and the rest of it you have to earn by meeting your objectives over the year. That's a very fair characterization.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Ms. Hogan, I'd like to go over to you. I'm going to read you one paragraph from your report that I think is incredibly important. And I'd like to, you just mentioned it before in the previous round of questions. It's some federal tenants reimburse or pay rent to Public Services and Procurement Canada for the office space they occupy, while others follow a different model where the amount of space they occupy has no impact on their budget. Of the 15 tenants cited above who did not agree to the reduction of the space they occupy, 13 or 87% had no financial incentives to reduce the space. In total, 93 federal tenants, 89%, do not reimburse the department for the space they occupy. Ms. Hogan, and you just mentioned you yourself in your department are one of those. How come in the recommendations that you made in this report, how come you didn't say that everyone should actually pay rent for the space they occupy so that they would actually be incentivized to reduce space? Because, of course, if you're philanthropic like you are, I see people will selflessly say we should reduce space for the benefit of everyone. But clearly that didn't work with respect to many of the other departments. So why would we not create a model where everybody actually pays rent for the space they occupy in their budget?
That is a policy decision that the government has made, that one department will own and or lease the buildings, and then it is given to tenants. So I don't make recommendations to change policy. I just talk about how the policies are implemented and whether I think there's some unintended consequences. And I think that's one of them here, is that there is a missing incentive to reduce office space, but that's just one of the elements, right? I cited other reasons as well that departments felt that they weren't ready to reduce their space.
Oh, I totally understand that, and I totally understand the other reasons. But it would seem to me that would be a very important reason, right? If you have no consequences in terms of loss of budget for failure to reduce space. I used to work as a CAO of a multinational, and one of the departments I had, it was real estate. And of course, the main incentive for everybody to reduce space is because it deeply impacts your bottom line. So how can we? I understand you're not allowed in your report to make such a recommendation, but is there a simple fix for the government to change that policy, to allocate costs differently?
Well, I think it's a conversation that Public Service and Procurement Canada could really weigh in on, since they're the custodians of the property, and what do they think might incentivize. They've been having the negotiations with departments who are hesitant to hand over space, and I would imagine since our report they've continued that, and hopefully there is some progress. I think it's important to know that when you look at departmental financial statements, to not bore folks with accounting terminology, accountants do put a value on a service provided without charge so that you can see how much it costs for that department to function, but it really doesn't have a cash impact on a department's budget.
Thank you very much. That is the time. And of course, I'll just remind members that in our report we have the ability to make recommendations as well to either complement or reinforce the auditor's good work. Suivant, c'est M. Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Let's remember that the report says that the affordability criteria is not income-based. Tenants in the lowest income whose affordable housing needs are greatest draw the least benefit from the initiative. But what we're seeing as an answer is the creation of a housing ministry. So we're essentially rewriting or recreating what used to exist in the CMHC with a new structure and new civil servants. Is this a vote of non-confidence in the CMHC? And how will this change the housing offering? Why don't we just take that money that would be spent on HR put it into the construction of housing in the provinces? Because here we're seeing another redundancy. Quebec is also going to do similar things. And you're not going to have the same standards, so projects will be further delayed. I have a house for women victims of violence, and it almost didn't get funded because of various jurisdictional disputes and different criteria. How is this new structure going to be able to assist with actually building?
So, I mean, at the heart of your question is, as I mentioned earlier, the key importance of collaboration between different jurisdictions in having common housing goals. And so we have been, successful as a department in developing agreements with provincial governments and in many cases municipalities across the country. So we do have experience, successful as a department in developing agreements with provincial governments and in many cases municipalities across the country. So we do have experience working with different levels of government. With Build Canada Homes, the intention is for it to function more as an investment bank, less as a organization that has allocations of resources for different jurisdictions. I can tell you that the minister hosted an FPT meeting about 2 weeks ago in Vancouver, and there was a lot of support for a collaborative approach between provincial and federal government in terms of supporting housing projects. The focus will be around a portfolio of projects, and I think that will assist, to your earlier point, it will assist rural areas, because one of the challenges they've often have is is just the capacity local for support from NGOs, from municipalities to move their projects forward is often not as high, and so the aggregation that we're going to be looking for with provinces will be a key way of both unlocking intergovernmental support and I think actually reaching rural areas a lot more successfully than perhaps we have in under past programming.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Juste
Thank you very much. Just as a complementary question. No. Yes, I just would like to ask this to be submitted in writing. Okay, so my apologies. Yes, in addition to what I asked for earlier, is it possible that the action plan for rural regions or remote regions be submitted in writing by your department? Thank you. Could you submit in writing the action plan targeting and the means to be used and the criteria to be used in the assessment? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemur. 2.5 minutes. Mr. Deltel, 5 minutes. First of all, a question for Ms. Hogan regarding the use of space by the federal government. This is a rather disquieting and disconcerting. You're talking about the drop in office space use would lead to savings of $3.9 billion in the next 10 years. But there hasn't been much progress in this area. From 2019 to 2024, you saw that reduction was less than 2%. And you said that because of the hesitation of certain departments to reduce their footprint. Could you give me some examples of such departments?
J'ai pas les noms des.
I don't have the names of the departments specifically, but I know that the first wave that PSPC approached were the major departments occupying several buildings with offices. Very few at this time have committed themselves to any agreement to reduce space. They quoted their mandate, the space required, the fact that there's a concern about demand to be working on site may increase, and they didn't want to let the space go just in case. And there also seems to be a lack of incentives, that lack of financial incentives to cut back. So I think PSPC needs to adopt a more global and directive approach in order to ensure better. What do you mean by more directive approach? Well, there are two elements. One is to sign agreements, that's necessary, but also to put forth a project to modernize office premises. If you look back to before the pandemic, everybody had a cubicle or a dedicated office for themselves, but now there's more of a hoteling system where you share an office. And that costs money and takes time to modernize buildings. So even the modernization is slow. And do you think that the objective of saving nearly $4 billion in 10 years will be achieved? Yes or no? That's an estimate made by the department. I did not audit all of the assumptions that were underlying this. We included in our report to demonstrate that there is a true impact. A building that is not fully used still costs their operational costs, their maintenance costs, and their real estate taxes paid to the municipality. Or payments in lieu of real estate taxes. All of this costs money, and if the building is not used to maximum capacity. We know that over the last 10 years, the government increased hiring of civil servants. According to Fraser Institute, from 2015 to 2024, there were 90,000 additional civil servants for an increase of 26%, whereas the population increase was only 9%. Is this fact that the government hired 3 times more workers than the population increase reflected, is this why they can't reduce their office space? I think saying that office space was underused dates back to before the pandemic and before the increase. There are always going to be fluctuations in the number of civil servants in buildings, but knowing how the buildings are used, that's missing. That element is missing at this time, and that would help advance progress. The target has been retained, in other words, reducing 50% by 2034. But right now, if nothing changes, that target will not be reached. That's why PSPC has to change their approach. So the goal will not be reached. That's what I am gathering from your testimony. And what about the Housing Accelerator Fund? We know that this was launched with great pomp and circumstance, and there were several announcements in the minister's riding and province in Nova Scotia, in Westmount Easton and Antigonish. And the minister was talking about 333 new housing units in 3 years and over 4,000 in 10 years. And what is the reality now?
Here's precisely for the starts in any particular region. I can happily share those with the committee in writing after.
Mais avez-vous le bilan global?
But you have an overall picture of the Housing Accelerator Fund with all of the announcements that were made a year and a half ago. What is the current status? How many housing units were actually built?
Give me 1 second. To date, the federal government has...
Your time is up.
Floor, please.
Okay.
And if you feel you need more information in writing, vous pouvez demander, okay?
Comme madame s'est
Okay.
engagée pour la
She has already committed herself for Nova Scotia.
To date, the federal government has signed 178 HAF agreements, which, when combined, will fast-track an estimated total of more than 750,000 housing units across the country over the next decade. I will get you those numbers as we have them.
Alors, vous allez les envoyer. You'll send them.
So you'll send them in to us?
Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the issues raised by Ms. Hogan in her report was the definition of affordability for units built under the federal lands initiatives. So with the Build Canada Homes, the definition has changed to show that housing is affordable if it is 30% of a household's income. And I'm wondering, Mr. Halusha, if you could answer this question. Could you comment on this definition, and also how will this guide affordability for housing going forward?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So Build Canada Homes will define affordability benchmark to track incomes of households for which housing will be affordable. And I'll give you, there's three elements of this. So deeply affordable units will be less than 30% of before tax area median household income for households with low or very low income in their regions. So fixed income or minimum wage earners are groups we expect will benefit. Secondly, affordable units will be less than 30% of before tax median household income for households with moderate or medium income in their region. So this is, for example, essential workers such as construction workers and care providers. And then obviously there's market units as well, which will be delivered by BCH as part of mixed income development to partially support the cost of building affordable and deeply affordable units. And so this was a really, I think, an important adoption of this approach to affordability, and as part of the investment policy of Build Canada Homes, and it will have a focus on social housing. I think that will be a significant focus of the types of investments that it will be undertaking.
Could you just clarify what you were saying about construction workers and care workers?
Just giving you an example that in areas where you've got 30% before tax medium household with moderate or medium income, then that would be those types of workers. So there's areas where you again, I think as Colleen had mentioned a number of times, affordability is not it is a term that has some contextual requirements, and so some areas the issue is social housing, and that's deeply affordable. That's, I think, with Ms. Hogan, one of the points she raised in her report. In other areas, focus is around like workers not being able to rent near places where they work. So, for example, nurses in areas of Toronto can't afford to be there. We've heard from a lot of Toronto Board of Trade, for example, has raised issues around manufacturing companies in Toronto that are having difficulty finding locations for their workers near them. So having a flexibility, so you need to know kind of who you're targeting in terms of the structuring of different developments, and so that's why there's that specificity.
And so there will be housing on public lands near the areas of work that you just mentioned?
So Build Canada Homes will it's not only going to build on public lands. That's one stream of the work. It will also be working with developers on private lands through financing, so much the way that CMHC has done in the past.
Ms. Hogan,
so there's a flexibility there as well in terms of the approach.
Okay, Ms. Hogan, do you have any comments on this definition of affordability?
So I'm hearing it for the first time as all of you are. I do acknowledge that affordability has a different meaning for different people. So you do need some that are deeply affordable, which I believe should be based on the income of a household. And then you do need others that will meet different definitions, and some that can remain at market rent. No program, I think, should try to accomplish all of it, but it sounds like there's going to be lots of things that are going to be moving here. So I look forward to a few years down the line when we can audit it and see how it's going.
Okay. Ms. Volk, in your opening statement, you mentioned that the Federal Lands Initiative is one tool. What other tools do you have to resolve housing issues?
Some of our biggest tools are the Affordable Housing Fund itself, and bigger than that is the Apartment Construction Loan Program. This is a program that offers low-interest financing to developers of purpose-built rental, and in exchange for commitments that they make to moderate some of the rents, so to make some of the rents more affordable and have energy efficiency and have accessibility criteria in the program and others, but in exchange predominantly for those, they have access to a low interest rate essentially a subsidized interest rate from the government to allow them to make the math work on purpose-built rental. That's an incredibly successful program. We're funding about $6 billion a year of purpose-built rental through that program. And then some of our other tools, we have other smaller programs, but of our other big tools, the big one is our mortgage loan insurance, which most Canadians know as something that they might need on their mortgage. An individual home buyer might need to have insurance on its mortgage. But more to the point today, we are doing $60 billion a year of insurance in purpose-built rental, and that is an incredible contributor to new supply of apartments in Canada.
Thank you very much. That is your time. We're now going to begin the the last abridged round, which will have 3 members. Mr. Kirk, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I would like to start with Ms. Hogan. Could you please tell us how often your employees are required to work from the office and at home?
So I have the ability to set terms and conditions for my employees, and they are slightly different than what the Federal Public Service has. Right now, all of our executives, so anyone at the director level and above, is required to be in 3 days a week. Everyone else is 2 days. However, that being said, we are in the service industry, and at times we go out to entities to audit. We travel to the 3 territories, and people could be there working a full solid week, if not even over the weekend, just to get work done while they're out of town and then come back. So we have a slightly different expectation, but we find that it's got its pros and its cons, no matter which way you look at it.
Thank you. And I would like to ask the same question to, I apologize, I misplaced my glasses today, Mr. Paul Haluka. I apologize.
So we have 4-day-a-week compliance requirement for executives, so that's how often they're in. So it's interesting, the discussion that Mrs. Hogan just raised. We're actually in a place as a department where we don't have enough space for our employees to meet the 3 days requirement. We will as of next spring, so we just secured a couple floors through PSBC's assistance, so we will be in full compliance with the 3-day policy as early as possible in the new year.
Thank you very much. And the same question for Ms. Volk, please.
My answer is very similar to Paul's. We have a requirement for 3 days a week in person for most of our employees, 4 days a week for executives. But we too have space constraints, so we're not able to meet that requirement in every one of our offices right now. We're acquiring space in our regional offices and in Ottawa to allow us to receive employees 3 days a week without them having to sit to a desk. So, but we are moving towards that. In Ottawa, which is our largest center of employment, will be done this fall, this winter. We'll have enough space for people to come back 3 days a week and 4 days a week for executives.
Thank you. So, my next question is, well, it's more of a statement than a question, but as a simple guy from Hamilton, there hasn't been a lot of clarity here today, and that's the part that is very difficult for me, and I would imagine be very difficult for the taxpayer. So, on one hand, we have the Auditor General who's clearly said that she would like more data, which I agree with 100%. We have to pin that down. Then we have the CMHC with there's no real time data. There was no clear answer to the bonuses, but then the member from the government had to swoop in and kind of answer that question for you, which I find very concerning. Then there's a lot of goals that haven't been met across the board. So I'm a little bit at a loss for words, and I've also witnessed one organization pass the buck to the next organization and back and forth. This is very concerning. We're in a housing crisis. we're not meeting our targets, and there's no real clarity, and the Auditor General just needs more data for more clarity. I don't think the folks at home, the taxpayer, would be very happy with what we've heard today. And I don't agree with this. Again, I have to go back to these bonuses. I don't agree. Well, now it's a withholding pay scheme. I'm just not clear on any of this. I would hope moving forward that we get a lot more clarity, the public gets a lot more clarity, because I'll be honest with you, when the taxpayer tunes into this, they're not going to be happy, because I wasn't a politician 4 months ago, and I'm not happy with what I'm hearing today. I would urge, and I think it's safe to say that you have the best interest for the country. I'm not disputing that. But there's no wonder why we haven't been meeting any of the goals, and we're in a housing crisis. No offense.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Do you have a brief question, or I'll let them respond? If you have a brief question,
They
go
can
ahead.
respond.
All right. I'll ask the two witnesses to respond, please.
Appreciate your question. I'm very apologetic statement. Very apologetic if you felt that we were passing the buck. That is certainly not the way that Paul and I work. I can provide some clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities. If the Auditor General concludes that a program has been administered poorly, that it has not, money is not going out fast enough, it's not, it is a problem of administration, I am definitely the one at the table who is accountable for that. If the Auditor General says in the future this program should have more, it should use a different definition of affordability, or there should be some design different in the program, that is something that Paul would address, because he's responsible now for the designing of the programs, or for the advice to government that designs the programs. But if it's about administration, that is absolutely me. So if we left any sense that we were passing the buck, I apologize for that. That's not our intention at all. It's very clear to us.
Thank you. Mr. Luca, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, you're next. 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hogan, I'd like to hear what you have to say on this subject. Have you already assessed the effectiveness of the agreements with the federal government for housing with its provincial partners? What we often note is that programs are designed based on Ontario, and it's easy to come to an agreement with Ontario. 2007 was like that. Ontario signed right away, but it took 3-4 years with Quebec. Of course, there was 2017. But of course, yes, there was COVID, and a lot fewer houses were built in Quebec with the same sums per capita as in Ontario. Has any assessment been based on the provincial needs in this kind of in this type of agreement? Is this part of your mandate? Have you ever wondered, how do you assess the effectiveness and efficiency of housing programs? I think I would refer the member to our report in 2022 on homelessness. This examined various programs in terms of managing affordability of housing across Canada. Did we assess the actual agreements between the governments? No. Usually we look to see whether the objectives of a program, a single program, have been met, or if there is good progress towards achieving the goals. We could keep this in mind for a future audit of housing, because it's an issue that's important to Canadians. So clearly we're going to go back to this issue to look at progress in a few years. As a Quebecer, what I note is that it's not well adapted. The basic criteria are not well adapted to realities of regions such as mine. But the agreements are difficult, and I feel like we come out as a loser. I could offer you the following comment. In the programs that we look at, there's one affordability criterion. If you look at this program more specifically, the criterion is that 30% of housing units should have rent representing less than 80% of the median rent in a region. This tool is not adjusted, so that means that 60% of the units that we're building will be at market price. So that depends what the objective is. I think the objective to adjust for affordability, but also flexibility to be able to have regional issues. I've heard that the definition that's upcoming may have this flexibility. So time will tell. At the same time, briefly, please, if you look at the average income in one neighborhood, somebody living in one neighborhood historically and has lower income may be extremely penalized. So are you satisfied with the responses that you've received today? That's a big question. There have been a lot of answers. I would say sometimes yes and sometimes no.
Turning now to Ms. Tesser-Dirksen, please, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you again for all of the time you've taken answering our questions. Housing is a human right, and it's a nonpartisan issue, and it's something that we're all going to work together to get better results for Canadians on. And I also want to thank you for doing your best to distill very, very complex answers into as simplest terms you can. I realize that it might not be a flashy headline or soundbite. You need to give us thorough answers. And they're complicated, complex policies that you're trying to explain. I am fully satisfied with Mrs. Volk's explanation on the at-risk pay. I'm not sure where there might be a lack of misunderstanding there anymore. It's been made very clear. I do want to give Mr. Haluka a chance to just wrap up the question that we were originally engaged in the other round of questioning with respect to the reduction of the disposal time for the transfer to the Land Initiative program. You were talking about outside factors that might be affecting the ability to meet those goals. Could you expand on that or complete your answer?
Sure. Thank you very much. So just a couple of points. I think I was ending just on the point around Canada Lands Corporation being moved into the housing portfolio. So that was announced by the Prime Minister and the Minister a couple of weeks ago, and that's, I think, a really important initiative for some of the points that have been raised here in terms of having a lot more coherence around among the federal actors. So it means that myself, Ms. Volk, the CIB and Canada Lands Corporation are now all in the same portfolio working under a single minister with a single mission. And the other point I was going to make was that there is a single mission now, right, that does bring together the focus on housing and affordability. It's mission number 4 that was laid out in priorities letters from the Prime Minister to ministers. So all that brings a great deal of coherence. With regards to speeding up the process, I think another important part of the announcement. The announcement was a really important day for us. Was the Prime Minister effectively saying that he was going to be, directing ministers to bring forward lands that had high housing potential, and I think that's the kind of really important signal and step that the government's taking, moving away from sort of what comes up through a surplus process to looking at what are the key pieces of land, key pieces of federal lands that are available and can be built on. We've also, through the fact that Canada Lands is now going to be will now have the resources in order to build on federal lands is a really significant step. I mean, this was part of the commitments that was made that Canada getting back into building, and that actually means that we'll be able to accelerate the amount and the speed at which we bring homes to the market. And that then creates space for additional lands to come forward and getting built on. Because right now, a lot of them have, it's been a lot slower. It's been dependent on market demand. So this is a key removal of a constraint that will, I think, bring a lot more homes to market over through this Build Canada Homes agency.
Great, thank you very much. And it sounds very optimistic, and that's great. But I have to be a little bit pessimistic and ask you about what types of vulnerabilities or risk exposures you anticipate we might encounter from maybe forces outside of our control, different variables, and what plans you might have in place to address those.
So the risk is it's a large challenge that we have before us. I think that's the key risk variable, which puts a premium on a lot of things like coordination with other levels of government. I think we approach this recognizing that partnerships is going to be a key aspect of moving forward. I would say that like the second, and I'm not sure it's a risk. I think this is I do tend to err on optimism, but I think the second kind of key thing is the opportunities around modular housing and industrial, the industrialization of home building. That is where we have the greatest potential. It's about 2% of the market share right now. We know that the factory utilization of those assets that are privately held with great capability of building homes are not being even fully utilized. So we could actually almost triple the amount of market share that modular has without actually increasing the asset base. So this is a really exciting, and what they need is they need supply. They need an order book that's full, and that will be a key part of what Build Canada Homes will try and provide. And that was again why the focus that was articulated was so much on that industry and taking place in front of a local modular providers' homes.
That's great. And you mentioned partnerships. And part of your role is to lead these policy related engagements with various partners. So who have you identified that might be kind of maybe outside the box from who you've already mentioned? And what's the breadth of that engagement? What scope do you have? Do you have reasonable discretion to identify different partners?
That's one of the key features of how we envisioned this new agency was actually to have a lot more flexibility in terms of the types of who they bring to the table, the types of deals they do. There's almost kind of not a wrong answer on that. They're going to be KPIs in terms of the investment criteria, which I think we're articulated. We're going to be focusing on supply. We're going to be focusing on affordability. We're going to be focusing on investments that utilize the modular product, because we do believe that's a key part of meeting the housing supply challenge. Like that is absolutely critical to it. But from a partnership perspective, we did an enormous amount of outreach over the summer. So we published in mid-August a market sounding guide that actually brought in about 700 separate kind of responses, favorable, and a lot of them wanting to partner with the new agency as it goes forward. So I think the risk is, and it's a good risk to have, is that there's going to be a lot of opportunity, a lot of deals that the new organization will be able to do, and it'll be a matter of working them through over the course of the next number of years.
Thank you very much. Before I excuse you, first of all, I will say thank you all for coming in today and being so helpful with your responses. There's been a couple of requests for information. I know this is just a note, Ms. Volk, just if you can be as thorough as possible with the Housing Accelerator information. I know it's something of great interest to members on both sides, and clarity will certainly be greatly appreciated in as many specifics as possible. On that, again, I will excuse the witnesses. The committee is going to pick it up again in camera just for some housekeeping. I'm not going to keep everyone long, but I do need to get through some items. So thank you very much. I will suspend and we'll come back in about 5-6 minutes. Mr. Housefather, there's nothing particularly earth-pressing, and I'm not going to pull a fast one here, so you're welcome to come back, but if you decide not to, that's understandable. It's your call there, because I know you're remote. It does take a few minutes. If we see you, great. No problem. If not, we'll see you in the house. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks.
This meeting